Three, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I think that's is that no. I don't know. That's still looking a little choppy. They're still looking a little choppy. I don't know. I don't know why it's choppy. I have no idea. So yeah, it's still choppy. Yeah. What is the Microsoft webcam I've been using for years. It's the same camera, but it's not the camera because I've been using it for all those live streams. I don't know if it's Windows. I don't know what the deal is. I rebooted the computer. Yeah, everything's the same like I always do. No, I didn't change anything, so this shouldn't be doing because I didn't make any changes. It's the same. It's the same settings I always do when I do these live streams. Okay, you said it's watchable, so roll with it. Okay, I'm gonna try to roll with it. If it's just too bad, then plus I'm not gonna be on here very very long. I'm not gonna be here very long because I'm tired anyway. I didn't get a chance to do this last week, simply because it was simply because it was storming, and you don't want the power to cut out while you're in the middle of this. So yeah, it was storming real bad. So, but anyhow, so I'm back. I'm gonna try to do this. Try to do uh, a live stream. Plus, it's later than normal. I would have normally gotten started with this 2 hours ago, but it's Easter. Um, yeah, yeah. Storms were insane. It was flooding, tornadoes. I mean, yeah, it was real bad here in Tennessee. So, okay. Um, so I saw this video that someone had put out, and apparently Behringer has made another clone. And welcome, Maddie, too. Apparently, Behringer has made another clone. It's basically a 6176 clone of the Universal Audio. I have the 610 Universal Audio 610. And some people are saying that, with Behringer making a 1073 clone and these other clones and whatever the case, my only thought is people were ridiculing Behringer for making clones when actually that's what Warm Audio does. They make clones. That's what Stam Audio does. They make clones. That's what Ventec Audio and BAE, they're all clone companies. So you can't jump on Behringer for being a clone company. Plus Behringer has been making clones of synthesizers and whatever the case may be. But, there's a pro and con to that, right? On Behringer, whatever Behringer make, whether, like I have the clone version of what's supposed to be the speakers, which is normally Genelec 1031s, right? Well, these are the Behringer Truths. They're Genelec clones. Do they sound as good as Genelec's? Not really. But, if you look at those few $100s a pair versus Genelec's is, Genelec's is about $1,500 to $2,000, right? But do I get really good results with them? Yes. So here's the thing. Whether it doesn't really matter if you're going to buy a clone, whether it's going to come from Behringer, Warm Audio, or whatever they take, or whoever is going to make a clone. The biggest thing is if they make a clone, most of the time clones will get you within 90+% of the expensive gear. And that's what you want, right? It's the same thing with plugins, right? Plugins are going to get you within 90% of an actual real piece of expensive gear. The thing is, if expensive gear was the ultimate choice to go, which most people would want to go with the top name brand expensive gear, but that's out of 90% of people's price range, is the very reason why we choose to use plugins and clones in the first place, because it can get us really, really extremely close results without breaking the bank. More people can afford, $500 to buy a, the Behringer or whatever. Like me, I have the Lindell Audio, which is a very reputable company. I have their Pultec style EQs. I have their 1176 clones. I also got a pair of their LA2A clone, which is a LA clone of the LA2A. And it comes within 99. It's really, really close to an LA2A when it comes to that compressor. But I'm not spending $4,000 on the LA2A. Those Lindell 2As only cost me about $700 each. I can afford $700 over spending $4,000 a piece. So this is the reason why I think Behringer, like any other company, as far as that business model, that's what made Warm Audio rich in the first place, building clones. Some people say, well, when you buy a clone, you may be compromising in quality. And this maybe just could be the truth or whatever the case. But if you look at it, most people either just don't have the room. Like for example, an SSL, 48 channel console, as an example, most people just don't have, even if there are being used on the market, instead of being millions of dollars like they used to, now they're only, you get them used as low as $30,000, right? But still, even though $30,000 is way cheaper than a couple of million for an SSL 4000, but still, most people still just don't even have $30,000 to drop on an SSL console, yet have the room and have it reconditioned to take 120 volts versus being the old power system and trying to run an HVAC system, because those type of consoles you just never turn off. You can't turn off like I can turn off my Allen and Heath, whatever the case may be. So the topic is expensive gear versus clones. Now, when I talk about the expensive gear, I'm talking about the ubiquitous gear, the 1176s, the LA2As, the, whatever, distressors, or, whatever the case may be. Neve 1073 preamps, Telefunken microphones, or whatever the case. I'm talking about the gear that the average top-notch studio would have spent just in gear alone, a couple of $1 million in gear and outboard gear and microphones. That's not including what it costs to build the live room and the control room. I'm just talking about the gear. And what's happened, especially with clones and software like plugins, it has pretty much even made the playing field more desirable buying the software, because you can get within the same quality range using plugins or clones than just happen to know that you need to buy the expensive gear. And maybe 20, 30 years ago, you would need to buy the expensive gear because clones and software just wasn't good 20 years ago. But now I have to beg to differ. I've proven that time and time again on this channel with some of the, people have heard some of the stuff that I've done, and I don't have LA2A compressors in my rack, or Universal Audio, whatever the case. I do have a Universal Audio 610 preamp. But it's the LA610 Mark II. But I don't have, and I do have Avalons, which are $3,000 preamps, but I don't have every piece of gear in my rack is, y'all understand what I'm saying. So that's the conversation for the night, because some people are going to be critical of software and prefer to have the most expensive top end gear simply because they want to have reliability, especially when you're dealing with clients. And sometimes you're like, well, I need to have Telefunken or Newman microphones or whatever because I got to have the most reliable because my clients are Janet Jackson or Beyonce, whatever. These are $1 million clients coming into my studio. I can understand that. But I think that software and clones today, especially from companies like Lindell Audio, I don't think you have that worry about your stuff breaking. So let me read some of the comments. We're just going to talk about that. Maddie said we had a cyclone in Australia too. Wow. Yeah, in Australia, being that it's really a gigantic island. It's considered a continent, but it's still a big gigantic island, pretty much, right? So I can see how cyclone versus hurricane, or typhoon. Yeah. So I can see how that. Yeah, you could be subject to that because we can't control where the weather goes. Man says the Behringer has the new UA clone and the 10, and the 500 series. That's what I was talking about, because they started making what Behringer decided to do is instead of making a cheap, what they would have done in the early 2000s, late 90s is make their own cheap version of a compressor, whatever the case. Because I told you when Behringer, before they acquired Midas and all these big companies, like Tannoy, they're known for their speakers, high quality speakers, Tannoy, Midas, TC Electronics, and so forth. I think, Behringer's, they had okay sound quality and they had lackluster build quality, knobs breaking, scratchy prods, buttons not working. That was the biggest problem why people just didn't like Behringer. The stuff was just, you paid $200 for it, and it was a really cheap, low-end piece of gear. But, Behringer have improved their quality control, acquired better companies, which allow them to be able to build better, authentic clones like they're doing now with the 1073 and with the compressor like their Behringer 369, which is a Neve 33609 clone. So I don't think, especially with the sound quality, I don't think anyone's going to hear any, recognizable difference between using the Behringer clone and using an actual authentic Neve or whatever the case. I don't think you would, especially in the mix. It's too much stuff going on in the mix to be able to identify. Most people can't even hear, even when you're using an API console or Neve console or an SSL with all the outboard gear and Telefunken and Newman microphones and AKG microphones and so forth. Most people can't even hear that was done on whatever the case, unless you just are really in tune to hearing an API console, especially like an API legacy or something like that. You just cannot isolate. No one's ears that in tune. I've heard some of the top mixing engineers in the world that they like, oh, I didn't know. It's just too much stuff going on to say, oh yeah, I know that was a 1176. You're running a 8-to-1 compressor, or all buttons in, whatever on the bass. You didn't know that. No, you didn't. They'd be lying. There may be a sponsor paid to say that, but no, you didn't. You didn't know that. Somebody, I can hear the difference between a blue stripe and a black stripe and third edition, Rev D. No, you can't. No one's ears are that in tune. But Matt says, I had an L2A Pro when I was a pro, but now my hobby is interested in Behringer 76. Not too sure what to make of it. Like I said, the good thing about buying, not just the Behringer, but any clone, is they're way cheaper to buy. So you can't be too mad if you just don't like your results. It's kind of like I've seen people, I've heard this all the time and time again, where you have some of these top recording studios that have bought like SSLs, and they just didn't like them. They like the Neves better. You know, I've heard that. And an SSL is not a cheap console to buy by far. Isn't a very expensive and is a highly widely used console. But you got some people that don't have SSLs in their control room. They have Neves. Like, for example, what's the studio? Air Studios in London. They have Neves in there. The Neve, you know, there's the I'm drawing a blank on the Neve. Not the classic Neve like the 8078 or the 8068 or whatever. It's the modern Neves. So the VRs, like a Neve VR 88 or whatever. You know, they just don't have SSL. There's nothing wrong with the SSL. They don't even have APIs. Now, Blackbird has APIs, Neves, and SSLs, but he caters to, you know, he's got 9 control rooms. So he's catering to whoever wants to book those rooms. But some studios are just Neve only. They're like Capitol Studios. They have a lot of Neves, and so forth. But Warheart. These clones usually sound okay. So let me read what Warheart Arts. Some of y'all are tuning in like Seven Sons, and I welcome, and Warheart Arts, welcome. If I didn't acknowledge you guys, welcome to. This is going to be a short live stream today because I'm tired. So he said, "Where I ain't got 2 pennies to rub together." I guarantee, go to your couch or your car, you'll find 2 pennies. They fell in somewhere. So, anyhow, so as the man said, most clones get you in the right ballpark. There are a few notables that are just one-on-one replicas sonically, but they're pretty much the same price as the original. And yeah, it's kind of like with BAE, you know. But if I look at it, if I'm going to buy a BAE, I might as well buy a Neve. That's just where I'm going with that. Wars of the 610 are awesome. Yeah, I got one. I got a Universal 610 preamp. Great vocal. You know, it's really great for vocals. My number one vocal preamp, of course, is my Avalon 737. But I do have the Tone Beast, which is an amazing clone of an API, and I also have the Altron, which are Neve 1073s. They sound good, so you know, I don't have no complaints on when it comes to those preamps. And this man, so I got all the expensive stuff, but like you said, I got the client's base for it. But people that just want soft sound and clones are 100%. Yeah, exactly. The only reason why you would, and I'm gonna read some more comments. The only reason why, like, if I was going to be booking Mariah Carey, you know, or Beyonce or Jay-Z, or even a big name band like U2, and I knew that whether they on a record label that's going to give them a $500,000 advance or whatever, or they just have the money to pay for the studio time. Yes, I'm going to have a Neve VR console. I'm going to have an SSL console. I'm going to have Pultec EQs. I'm going to have LA2As. Distressors. I'm going to have, the classic, Lexicon effect processor. I'm going to have, Eventide 3000, H3000 stuff, gear like that. I'm going to have that. One I can afford because I got those type of clients. But most people are home-based project home recording studios. Most people just Mariah Carey isn't coming to my studio. She just isn't. She's going to some big name studio in Los Angeles. That's just the way it is. Even today in 2025, they still book the studios that are open. They still book. That's just the way it is. But I think as these clone companies like Warm Audio, and as artists realize they don't have the budgets like that anymore, they will start going to studios that they don't care about the gear like producers be. Producers look at studio, they look at their studio and their gear list. Oh, he's got Warm Audio. I'm not booking that. He's got STEM Audio. I'm not booking that. I don't see Universal Audio. I don't see. They're not doing that today. A lot of them are slowly moving away from that. They're just like, well, let me listen to some of the recordings and the mixing that's coming out of the studio. Oh, wait a minute, listen to that. That's all that really matters in the end. And I think all of y'all would agree, right? That's all that really matters is the results, not really the gear, right? So, let me see. If War says if it claims to do saturation, it's a gimmick. Only certain analog hardware can get saturated. Plugins can never do that. Just add predetermined harmonics as if emulating the. Well, it's kind of like why these plugin companies are making tape saturation, because when I know part of the sound of the classic 80s and 70s sounds was a tape machine. When you record through that console into a 24-track Studer tape machine, that's the sound. That is the sound. That gave it that big sound. And all the other outboard gear that was used on top of that, whether you used Yamahas or Roland delays or whatever, AMS delays or whatever, that was just part of the mixing process. But that sound came from those microphones, those preamps going through that console, going to tape. And they've been trying to emulate that to give you that big, fat, saturated analog sound. That's what plugin companies are trying to do. But once again, we got to remember, plugins is all dependent on the sampling rate, the power of your computer. And also we have to think about the interface and this conversion. All that's planned to try to do what tape machines have always been doing. If you listen to all the classic 80s records, computers weren't even in the play. The only computer in the studio was the computer to control automation on the console. That was the only computer in play. You got an SSL, and you might have a computer to maybe, it might memorize the EQ settings for recall and all that. But that was probably Microsoft DOS 1.0. It was so, your Android and iPhone is way more powerful than the computers used in the 80s. But so let me, he said ditto. So, Seven Sons said, I don't know what you're doing. You can make an expensive piece of gear sound bad. Yep, that's very true. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can make a clone sound great. If you do know what you're doing, that's really 50% of it, really. You know what I mean? That's really 50% of it is skill set, because if someone is running 6-to-1 compression when they should only be running 4-to-1 or whatever, they're over compressing, whatever the case. They're, they don't know where to set, the attack, the release. They don't know how to set the EQ. They got, they're pushing 8K in their EQ and causing simulants, whatever the case. They're pushing 3,000 on the mid-high, which is, now they get, they're trying to get clarity, but what they're doing is just getting this too much dB of mid-range, high mid-range, and or they're not cutting enough 300 or whatever, or they're boosting too much 100 or whatever, that sort of deal. They don't know how to set the high pass filter or whatever the case, or the threshold is set wrong, or just a whole plethora of things. They got the reverb tail hanging over too long. They got, 2.3 microsecond of delay, reverb tail, which is starting to make the mix sound muddy. That sort of deal. So let's see, man. I have the Neve 33609, and a friend bought me the Behringer 369. The Behringer stored at a way lower gain threshold than the Neve. Can't push it as hard. But if you're okay with that, you could. Once again, it's also depending on what you're using it for. Some people might be using it as a bus drum compressor. Some people might be using the master bus. Some people might use it as its own, for using it to put compression on the bass. It really depends. The same thing with your, a DBX 160 on a master bus versus a DBX on snare. Two different results on using the DBX 160 on a master bus versus trying to use it on kick and snare. It just depends on how the person uses the gear. But also, once again, yeah, remember, a Neve 33609 is about $5,000. A 369 Behringer 369 is only about $500. So I'm not expecting a Behringer 369 to be in the same ballpark as the 33609. I'm just not. I'm just trying to, if I had one, I'm just trying to get close. That's the whole thought. But then in some instances, you can be better off using a Behringer, the Neve 33609 clone, like I do with the IK Multimedia T-Rex plug-in on a bus or whatever. So you just got to figure out what works. Warhearts says I never afford genuine Neve stuff. Believe it or not, you can. If you look for, you just gotta search for deals. Be on, if you're on Reverb or whatever, and it really depends on what Neve you're looking for. So just but Neves can be affordable. Even if you look at, some people look at the 19-inch rack stuff for the Neve, they never consider getting the 500 series Neve stuff. A 500 series Neve stuff, we still get you this Neve quality, but it's just a 500 series. $700 for a Neve 1073 versus spending $3,000 for that Neve 1073. But you get it in a 500 rack, and $700 is way more. Is way more affordable than $3,000 a unit. Most people, I can't even do $3,000 a unit. So see, Maddie too says, I can get the Behringer for cost too. So might let me see. So might be worth a punt. They have to be making these units for like 200. No, they're not. I don't think Behringer's going to make those units that cheap. But once again, if you got a very powerful enough PC, you can always look at the plug-in route. Some people figure, but some people, there's always debate on authentic analog gear is always going to sound better than digital plugins. That's another debatable subject, which is part of this subject. Can you get away with doing everything just using plugins? I definitely know you can definitely get away with it, especially on VST instruments. Definitely, for sure. But not necessarily maybe. One thing I don't think plugins are still going to ever match is like preamps. That's just my thought on it. So, Welcome Zone Recording Studio says Sound Euphorium in Nashville has an API legacy. Okay, I don't know. I've never heard of Sound Euphorium Recording Studio. I don't know if they're in because there's Berry Hills is known. They got a lot of recording studios over there. Then of course in Nashville there is Music Row, which is near downtown Nashville. Been down there quite a bit. Welcome Spawn. He says salute. Airborne all the way. Jumpers hit it. Keep a good tight body position. Keep a sharp look on descent. Lower jumpers had a right of way. Prepare to land. Perform the proper PLF. Land airborne. Okay, so either that or buy some used warm gear. Yeah, like I said, is Warm Audio has proven themselves as a clone company. They're probably, to me, I think Warm Audio is probably the most successful clone company out of all of them, because there is other clone companies like Stam Audio, there is Audioscape and so forth. There's Ventec Audio. But when it comes to clone companies, the most we hear the most of is Warm Audio. Like I just picked up a Warm Audio 47 tube microphone, and I'm anxious to try it. I've watched so many videos and heard the results of that 47. I said, I got to get a tube 47. Got one. So I'm anxious when I get my next artist over here to record a session. That's what I'm going to use. Even though I love my my T11As, which are basically AKG C12 clones. They've been modified with upgraded capsules and tube circuits and all that. They got the mods on them, but that is what I'm going to use to see how it works out. Welcome, Born Shamir. Um, so hardware units cannot create essence of tape saturation without tape. Plugins cannot. Like I said, it's you got some people that are hardcore because you got to look at some of the mixing engineers that are using a lot of plugins, like Dave Pensado. You got what's his name? They used to run Electric Lady. I'm drawing a blank on his name. Famous mixing engineer. Andrew Sheps. There's a lot of them. Sylvia Mass. There's a lot of top Grammy Award mixing engineers that are big on plugins. So it really, plugins are tools like outboard gear. I'm not gonna always say you're not gonna get great results just using outboard gear because I use plugins. It's just tools, right? But one thing I can say about hardware gear is it is part of the sound for hardware gear is the electronics. That's undisputable. That's what really gives hardware gear its signature is the electronics being used. And that's the one thing a PC or Mac does not have. PC and Macs do not have tubes in them. They don't have input and output transformers and things like that. That gives you that, even or odd order harmonics and all that. They just don't. So it's digital, and the conversion, like and it's kind of like when the ADD conversion is like when you play a CD. Most people never think about this, but when you play a CD player and you're listening to the output of that CD player, whether you listen to headphones or it's plugged to speakers or whatever, there's an AD to DA converter. The information on the disc is digital, is ones and zeros being converted through a converter so you can hear it so it sounds like music, whatever the case. The same thing with your player in your car. Same thing when you're watching your computer or on your monitor. Your sound card in your PC or Mac is an AD to DA converter. The only significant difference between those converters and an actual converter used for recording is one, processing power, more inputs and outputs. It's designed for more capability. It's more powerful. And there's a lot of factors to that. It's kind of like my Antelope Orion. It's a 32 input, 32 output. So that's what, because of the processing and so forth. But that's what you're listening to on this live stream. The sound card is an AD to DA converter. That's, if there was no sound card, it can convert the sound from digital audio for you to hear me talking on this live stream. So that's, it's the same thing. If a digital mixer, you buy the Behringer X32 or Personas Live or, Yamaha TF5 or whatever, the input where you plug all the inputs into that digital mixer, the inputs are going into an A to D converter, and then the outputs coming from a D back to an A converter out of that digital mixer. That's how you're able to hear it. So the sound quality is based on the conversion as well. Let's see. Warren Harvard says, I'm not in the 500 club. Well, you can't, I'm not going to sit there and say you can or you can't, but, just kind of, some people's financial situations are different than others. That's all I can say. Yeah, Born said, never ever will ones and zeros ever be better than circuitry. And that's subjective. So, because like for me, because we're using DAWs, you're going to have some sort of conversion because, it's just not economically feasible to use tape machines or to edit. Just tape machines are just not editable like you can in the DAW. So you're going to, we're down to Pro Tools or Reaper or whatever. So we have to use some sort of conversion. But to bring back a lot more analog fatness and all that, that's the reason why I try to go as much analog into the DAW and try to bring as much coming out, uh, and trying to go through as much analog outboard gear as possible, so it doesn't sound as digital, being digital as long. So that's the reason why I do it. But some people are strictly in the box, and they get great results, especially for what they do. But I know I wouldn't try to do like a rock band and try to be in a box. I don't see how that would be. I don't see how that would work or even sound good. So, so it just depends. Man said, Walmart. Oh, he said Walmart 47 and 67 are legit mics. You'll find them in big studios. It's kind of like with Treasure Owl. Of course, you already know. Everyone knows Treasure Owl. I'm drawing a blank on his name. He works with Warren Hewitt but he's a Grammy Award-winning mixing engineer, Joe Correll. And Joe Correll uses Warm Audio mics all the time, but he's not the only one. I've watched numerous Warm Audio videos of a lot of these are not big name artists, but I've listened to results of those Warm Audio microphones, and that's what compelled me to buy them. I already had the Warm 47 Juniors, which I was happy with those results, but I didn't have the Warm Audio tubes. So like I said, I'm starting to buy the tubes, and I know that they sound good. So okay, man, sir, Eddie Kramer. Yeah, that's who I was thinking of, Eddie Kramer. Eddie Kramer, but not no Eddie Kramer, because Eddie Kramer works with Sunset Sound. I'm talking about Breyer, Michael Breyer. That's who I was talking about for Electric Lady. That's big on plugins. That he sold a lot of his outboard gear to go in the box with plugins. He kind of did with Andrew Sheps. And it's kind of like if Andrew Sheps and Michael Breyer are just strictly plugins in the box, I don't think anyone could, with their reputation, I don't think we can dispute if they want to be in the box with plugins, as if plugins don't work, because plugins do work. They do. Warren said, my struggle is real, trying to work out of the box as much as possible. Yeah, I mean, that's the way I prefer to work, and it's a preference. So let me see what else. Cordy Stu said, I just purchased 2 Harrison 500 series mic pre, as well as 2 of the 32 channels C mix scripts. Sound great. Thinking of buying the console, but I figured might check out the units first. Yeah, I think it's kind of like they did a recreation of the original Harrison 32C console. Even though I've seen a Harrison 32C console, it looked pretty rough. But I think I saw one for about $5,000. I was like, I wouldn't mind taking a shot on one of those and recapping it and all that and getting that authentic original Harrison console. That's the one that they used at Westlake. That's the one that, all the front end was done for Michael Jackson's recording, for Thriller and Off the Wall and so forth. But some people shy away from that because, they don't want to get into that type of component and so forth. And so Warren says, I'm sticking with my 19 racks. And I would tell anyone, if you prefer, that's what you want to do. That's what I would say. That's what I got a ton of 19-inch rack gear. So I can't sit there and be hypocritical. I don't think you should use 19-inch rack. I'll probably look at my background like, really? You telling people not to use 19-inch rack gear, and you got a room full of 19-inch rack gear? So, but so man says those who track certain things through tape will eventually go through a converter anyway. We'll track for the tape saturation and compression, then go back. Yeah, that's all I'm saying. If you're using a DAW, Pro Tools, Reaper, doesn't matter, Studio One, you're going to go to an AD converter anyway, because you're going into the computer. So I would say invest in your converter anyway. So let's see what else man said, but that's the only sometimes when people pay for it. Yeah, just like I said, some people want to do tape. I don't have the patience for tape. Um, I love the way tape sound. What I mean patient, I'm talking about as far as editing, because you can't edit tape. The only thing that the way people edit tape was the razor blade. It's just too much. It's too much. You have way too much options and controls for editing through a DAW than you do tape. So, um, somebody said probably might have those one. Some people do. You know, there is a company like microphoneparts.com that people do, but I haven't bought none of my warm audio gear like I did some of my MXL gear. Like this microphone I'm using right now is a modified MXL. It's the MXL 2000, but I modified it. I didn't do a lot of mods, but I did recap it with some better caps and stuff like that. So let me see. Oh, somebody's just going back for a comment, man. Oh, so let me see. You'll find my email on your main page. You can email me. Okay, I'll go look for that. So let me see. I use the Tascam Port Studio. Actually, I finally run 2-track into Reaper just to match. Okay, gotcha. So oh man, so we don't edit on tape. Yeah, like I said, it just, but that's what they had. They had no choice to do that. They had no choice to do that. In that, that's the only way you could do it. Then, me personally, I just can't. But tape, I would say, when it came to, we also have to look at, if you look at 40 years ago, in the 80s, everything was bands. I don't care what genre was, except for hip hop, which is basically vinyl and a drum machine. That was hip hop, right? But most genres, R&B, jazz, rock, country, and so forth, was bands. So, how do you record a band? You have to mic a band. Sometimes you can DI a band, but most of the time you had to mic the band, especially the drums. And one of the biggest part of the sound was the rooms they were choosing. So they would choose, we're going to get this room because we want this drum sound. And the mics that was chosen on the drums, what we're going to use for the kick or the kick in, kick out. SM57 top and bottom, 421s on toms, maybe a pair of Newman U87s as overheads, maybe a Newman U87 for the room mic. I would probably use a Royal 121 ribbon on a guitar with a SM58 on a guitar cabinet, whatever the case. That was for the guitar sound. And they have gobles in the room, which are basically room baffling dividers to isolate some of the sound. They would change some of the room diffusion, overhead diffusion and reflections in the room, and just things like that. And all that went into like a Neve 8058 console or something like that, which was then routed out to like a Studer 800 tape machine. And they would have signal chains, like the microphones for vocal mics, where it might go through they might use a 47 or 251 on vocals. Then it would then run into a Neve 1073, which then would go through like a TubeTech CL1B or whatever the case. Then that was all chained in to the patch bay, and that went into a tape machine and all that stuff. Or they might be using the preamps on the console. So, and that was the chain that you got for the front end. Then after that, they may take the tapes and go into another room, which would be a mixing room, and they might have an SSL console in there with more outboard gear, more delays, more reverbs to mix it. Then it left there, went to a mastering, where they would have like a Shadow Heroes mastering or mainly massive passive EQ and all this other stuff. And that was the sound that we're listening to. And of course, in the 80s, stuff didn't have to be bass heavy like it is now. You know, the low end's thicker in music today than it was in the 80s. So that's just how we had to do it, and they had to cut up the tape to move tracks around. That's just how they hit, But a person that did it, the engineer was so good with the razor blade, he can cut with precision. I wouldn't to me, I just cringed knowing as an artist, I spent $250 to $300 a reel, only getting 3 songs per reel. And they cutting up the tape. I'm seeing thousands of dollars being cut up. That's just how I look at it. I'm just not trying to go that route, but they did it. So Warheart Stu says hardly anyone is 100% analog. You talking about music couldn't be bass heavy or the needles would pop out of the grill. Yes, they were playing vinyls, but that really didn't matter because a lot of people were playing CDs, and CDs came out in 82. So, but yeah, if you were playing a vinyl, yeah, but then again, like music was not bass heavy concentrated anyway, not for the purpose that the needle popping on. It's just that it wasn't, certain genres of music like techno and EDM and as hip hop changed and all that, everything became more 808, 909, bass heavy and all that. That's what kind of, and people start using more bass heavy, like sampling and drum machines and all that. That's what really kind of changed the game to change that, because vinyls to this day, just you're not getting, you think about all that information trying to go through that needle, doesn't matter if you're 33 or 78 speed, whatever the case on the vinyl. But there's just the music genre in itself was changing, because music itself always changes. The 40s music is not like the 50s. The 50s music is not like the 60s. 60s is not like the 70s. 70s like the 80s. 80s like the 90s. 90s like the 2000s, 2010s. Here we are in the 2020s, right? Music is always evolving, especially as technology changed. When synthesizers became more prominent, you start hearing more synthesizers in music, especially stuff becoming synthesizer dominant in the 70s and 80s, like the Yamaha DX7 became a staple keyboard, So yeah, that technology is going to advance, just like technology advanced the recording industry, because we can buy plugins and clones and all this and do this at home. That kind of changed the need to go to a commercial studio. Most people are getting whatever, because you can do this at home. It's like, yeah, I love commercial studios, but I'm like, I don't need to go to a commercial studio for what, and a lot of people feel that way. So, yeah, see, Warren said Mario DeSanti does. Oh, talking about as far as editing on tape. I don't know who Mario DeSanti is, but I believe you. So back then there were real engineers working that stuff. Well, no, I'm not gonna sit there because there's still real engineers working and stuff, but I know what you mean. It's kind of like people trying to do this at home. They don't have any, they don't have the vast amount of, experience. I get it. For the most part, technology just changed the game. In a lot of ways, it changed for the better. In some ways, it changed for the worse. But that's just the reality of change. We could go a 3-hour conversation on the good pros and cons of change, right? But see, man said multi-track recording changed the game in the day with isolation. That's the difference between the 60s Beatles and come together. And just the music in general, because you got to look at the Beatles. In the instant, you got to look at the Beatles the Beatles are only prominent from the 60s to the mid 70s. They didn't stay together. You had John Lennon kind of, went his own way, started doing his own thing. Paul McCartney started doing his own thing. Ringo Starr started. The Beatles really weren't the Beatles anymore either, because things changed. That style of music the Beatles became really popular for, but the music genre was changing, from the 60s. It became just like with disco. What would disco lasted a good, 8 years? We're talking 75 to 70 to 83. Disco just fell off, the same thing with funk, hardcore funk. Even funk changed from James Brown type of funk to bass slapping funk in the 70s, funk bands. That kind of fell off, into, what we call more R&B heavy stuff in the 80s, just like hair bands, from the 70s. That was 70s hair bands, going in the 80s. We're talking Rat and Motley Crue and Twisted Sister, the big hair bands. But that started falling off in the 90s. Everything became alternative rock, just like with hip hop. Really, when we really called it hip hop, we were calling it rap music. And it just and then, with NWA and of course, then Tupac and Biggie and, now whoever the hip hop artists are today, it's not the same sound of hip hop like it was in the 80s. Just things are always going to change. Technology is going to change. And a lot of times people like me, that's my age and so forth, sometimes we don't like change. It's kind of like some people, if you're used to a 68 Camaro with a 320, maybe have a 327 cubic inch motor in it, 700 CFM carburetor and, 3-speed transmission, 373 gears. And that's the ultimate hot rod. You may not like a modern Camaro with an LS motor. You just, I prefer the old 350 with the carb. That's just, sometimes people just they don't like newer changes, and because they just don't, some people just they don't like it. So, and I can't make people like, new stuff, none of us can. Some people are just going to always want to have a recording studio with a large format console with the tape machine and outboard gear. That's the only which sound they prefer. And there's nothing wrong with that. To me, it's a lot more work, but you still can get amazing results, but it's just more work. But to me, I kind of like the mixture of old school and using new school and new technology. I prefer that because the new technology can make a lot of stuff and make your workflow and things like that a whole lot easier. So it's just that, just really boils down like me, a lot of people, you got a lot, you think about it too, the age generation. If you have someone that's 20 years old, right? And a 20-year-old is probably going to like music within the last just 10 years. So we're talking music from 2015 and up. Because a 20-year-old was born in 2005, right? But if you look at some me, who my mind's me, I was born in 1970. So I was listening to 70s music, right? They just can't relate to 70s, yet alone 80s. They weren't around. That's like me being, born in 1970 and trying to understand why you got guys that are 70 and 80 years old and they love a 1955 Chevy Bel Air. To me, a Chevy Bel Air car is not an attractive car at all. It looked like a big, gigantic bubble balloon, it looked like a big, heavy steel round bubble to me. But you got people that love the 55 Chevy Bel Air. They love, especially one that was 70s, 80s in that armor. So to me, I got this classic 55 Bel Air, and they can't understand why you don't like it. And I'll say the answer to this. I don't like it because it's not my generation, so if that makes sense. So it's the same thing with music. My generation music is 70s, 80s, and 90s. is my prime set of music that I listen to, and is what I like. Um, so let me see. A man said, I agree for the worst. Musicianship has declined. Well, you know, and I'm just gonna be some people. I hope I don't piss some people off, but I just have to keep it real. There are a lot of people today that are trying to find shortcuts. And I'll use, for example, somebody named something the producer, right? If y'all know what I'm talking about. He's gotten famous and rich for that very concept. You know, and he had made a video on why he almost got in trouble sampling, right? Me as a musician, I don't need to sample. I know how to play the parts that I want to hear in the tracks. I can physically play those parts. I don't have to sample, because when you're sampling someone else's already recorded music. That's music that's already been copywritten. It's already been on someone's someone said Bolo. Like I said, I'm not, just saying somebody, the producer, right? It's the same like he's talking about the whole Splice thing, right? It's kind of like if you look at it, why do you think Pharrell got in trouble with what's his name with Blurred Lines? Why do you think that's pretty much ended Vanilla Ice's career? A lot of people get in trouble for sampling because they don't understand you just can't sample copywritten music. You have to get permission. You have to get license. Now, if you go there and say, well, I want to get a license to use your music, and if the music is licensable, then that's a different story. This is the reason why you want to get a license to even do, when you record someone's music, this is the reason why you want to say, I got a copyright to be able to do another arrangement. That's why remixes is a whole, because the song itself, is actually, songs are really like lyrics, as an example. When you're listening to music, you're listening to music composition arrangements that are, of a song. That's why you can have different versions of the same song, if that makes sense. So yes, Maddie said it's true, Mark. I can't listen to much new music. I just can't. It don't have the same substance for me like the 90s and 80s does. So man says, what, you don't like the Glenn Miller Orchestra? Actually, I do like the Glenn Miller Orchestra because I'm a trumpet player and I played in bands. So I'm used to listening to orchestra music anyway. So, I love the appreciation of listening to people playing instruments. It takes talent to be able to play instruments. So that's why I don't just listen like the Glenn Miller Orchestra. Don't get old to me, or listen to big band, or listen to, or even listen to Wynton Marsalis, at the Lincoln Theater, and listen to bands like that. I never get tired of listening to bands. Someone playing, to the moon, and listen to a full band. I'm just, that never gets old to me because I'm a musician. I'm a trumpet player. Let me see. Since I'm stuck in an I am too. So I am. So kids don't understand. Record your own stuff. Yeah, like I said. Now, am I against sampling? No, because you can get creative. But I'm just saying, don't think because you've made a career of sampling people's music that makes you a musician, because it doesn't. It just makes you a user of someone else's music. Some people may not like that, but that's what you're doing. You're taking some of the music and trying to use it. There are a lot of people that do not have the drive and the patience to learn how to actually play a guitar or a set of drums or keyboards. They just pick at those instruments, and so they want to cheat. And sampling is a way of cheating. And it just sounds mean, but I'm not trying to be mean about it. It's just that, you take a beat You create a drum beat and then use some samples, and then you grab all your boys around and they all, man, that sounds good, all the beats and all that, with the sampling. Just because your homeboys, like it doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do, because they don't know the legal aspects of it either. They don't know legalities and all the copyright laws and all the stuff that can get you in trouble. They just thought, man, that beat is fire. Now I understand, some people know, but a lot of people don't know. So going back to, he said, I listen to new, Warheart said, I listen to new, less popular music all the time and love it. It just depends, I'm not saying I don't listen to some modern music. Like, I do like some of the K-pop stuff. I do like some of the K-pop, but in essence, in general, there's a lot of, and it really gets technical. It can really get technical. So as to why, and I'm talking about getting into music production and chords and progressions and substance of music that makes music, that really can get technical as to why I don't think music today is like the 90s, 80s, and 70s and 60s and so forth. Let me see. Ray said Vanilla Ice quit the game, didn't want to be part of it. Well, a lot of that too, because look how, if you got to look at recording contracts. The way recording contracts can make a lot of artists quit the game, because a lot of people thought if you're an artist and you got a record deal, a lot of times they think, I got a record deal, not realizing that contract have put a noose, tight grip on your control, because now you're under contract, and the contract says you can only do this. You can only do A, B, C, and D, and that's it. You're only going to get paid blah, 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 and that's it. Because you're under legal contract. And people, once they realize that contract got this ironclad grip on you, they don't like it. Most people that get a record contract realize they're getting screwed with that contract. And now they're fighting to get out of the contract. And now they know that you didn't have the money coming into this music game, and you're sure not gonna have enough money to get out of this music game. We're gonna let you out of the music game only if we can't benefit from it. But if we can still benefit from it, and that was the whole thing of the whole basis of why Prince had a problem with Warner Brothers and wrote Slave on his face. Because he was still under contract. So, like I said, man said Wu-Tang did some cool stuff with samples. I'm not saying you don't use samples. What I am saying is be careful using samples, because samples can get you in trouble if you're not careful. You're like, let's say you hear this amazing snare sound, like a little, and you just want to sample the sound of it. You can't get in trouble for that. But you can get in trouble because anything that has a recognizable melody is how you get in trouble. It's the melodies, because melodies sound like sound compositions of copyrighted material, not the sound. This is the reason why we all bought Yamaha Montage boards and all used the same electric piano sound. None of us can get sued for copyright infringement for using the same electric piano sound from a Yamaha Montage. That stuff is not copyrightable. It's not copywritten. What is copywritten is when you start creating melodies that are distinctive to your writing. That is copywritten, not the use of it, the sound of it. So, oh yeah, Warsa, agree in the gray area. Yes, exactly. So, rad samplers also, but they clear everything for. Yes, like I said, you just got to be careful. That's all I'm saying with sampling. I would never tell them don't use samples. I'm just saying you got to be careful with them. Like me, I don't have to use samples because I can play everything I want in my songs. I can literally play it. If I want a certain horn line, I can actually play the the trumpet and sax and all that, they get the horn line. It's kind of like when I was being sarcastic when I made a video talking about What You Won't Do for Love featuring Behringer gear. The horns, even though I did a little video in my house, the horns that you're hearing on that track is actually me playing sax and trumpet. That's not a sample or keyboard. That's me actually playing trumpet and sax. Those are actual horns I used for that. The guitar playing that's in that's me playing the guitar. The bass in that's me playing the bass. The keys and everything that you're hearing in that is actually me playing the keys. The only thing that I'm not playing is an actual real set of drums, but I actually sequenced the drums. So let me see, go back to so Man Winner says and modern 360 media deals are 360 is the worst. It was better when it was a 50-50 deal or whatever. The 360 deal, because I'm like, you're trying to find every way to make money to keep you in survival mode. I would never do a 360 deal. I would rather be independent. I look at this. I would rather make $10,000 and owe no one than to make $1 million and only got $10,000. That's just how I look at it. Yeah, oh yeah, so Prince made millions and was pissed because the labels made tens of millions. Yeah, that's exactly what he's saying. He's always said that. You know, why should the labels make that kind of money when I'm doing all the work? Which is true. So it's so easy to play a real hi-hat. Some people can't play a real hi-hat. That's just the way it is, because you have to have rhythm and coordination and all that. You got to do a lot of practice to play drums. Have I ever seen a video called something like Black Man Learning Bobby Caldwell is White? Oh, but you know, it's kind of like if you listen to it, because, and this is not the sound racial, but a lot of white artists, white artists were mainly known for, like, especially country, when you do the twang, right? You don't hear no here, that was their thing for country, right? But a lot of white artists weren't known for doing they weren't known for that soulful runs. They just weren't. And there were certain inflections and certain, tones that only was known that black folks did as artists. But when you hear people like Bobby Caldwell was doing that, that's why it shocked everyone. It's the same thing with when Tina Marie, because everyone know with Tina Marie when she was doing the duet with Rick James, Love and Fire and Desire, right? But she was doing she did that the fast stuff, the funky stuff that she was doing, because Tina Marie was a hell of a guitarist. He said, you're not racist. I'm not racist. Us whiteys don't have that. Actually, I'm gonna have to. I would say like this. There are actually quite a few white artists that can sound real soulful, that will shock you. But I think a lot of times it really depends on the artist, their upbringing, what they listen to, what's in their influence. And that really doesn't matter, because and I would say this, because just because someone's black doesn't mean they can sing soulfully, because not every black person can sing. There's always been stereo myths about everything. We always had a myth that, black folks can jump, play sport. No, not every black person can jump and play sports. That is not true. Not a lot of black people can't fight. White guys, or, whatever, it's kind of like, if you look at like NBA, right? Some of the best base, there's some, if you look at some of the white NBA players in the NBA, they would not gotten there if they weren't good. But typically, athletically, black people have been born just, it's just a genetic trait to be a lot more physically athletic. It's just what it is. Um, you know, but it's not saying that there aren't amazing white athletes. You know, same thing with musicians. You know, it's like I would say, even though we have always account, like, let's say some of the most amazing guitar players, right? We'll say, I'll use like Eddie Van Halen, right? Right. Eddie Van Halen is probably one to me, uh, one of the best guitarists out there, right? For what he played. But if you listen to other genres of music, like we'll go into the Isley Brothers, or we go into some, we go to Norman Brown, or we go to George Benson, also amazing guitars, BB King, right? And I would say, so it really depends on, I don't think that if you listen to some of the baddest musicians out there, I've seen Japanese musicians, I've seen Korean musicians, I've seen I've seen even Korean singers, female singers that are Korean, that will, they will blow some of these artists that we got here in the States, vocally. And they don't even speak English as their first language. They speak Korean. But when you watch and listen to some of these Korean artists, you're like, God, she can sing. That's just what it is. It's kind of like I was watching, what's her name? She sounds just like Whitney Houston. Glennis. Glennis is coming. I'm drawing a blank on her last name. And she sounds just like Whitney's, but she's actually Dutch. English is her second language. She's an amazing vocalist. So it's, there's just, when it comes to musicians, when I listen to, when I see horn players, whether it's saxophone players, some of the baddest saxophone players have always been of all shades, black, white, Latino, Japanese. So it's not a race thing. I think it's more of an influential thing. What it really, because to me, it's kind of like, if you listen to some of it's kind of one thing that gives, I would go back to Nashville and why the country music is recorded the way it is, and country western, session musicians in Nashville, what makes them so good, because these musicians are enrooted to make playing sound good, right? And that's what they're capturing when they're recording. This is the reason why Nashville musicians work, versus, and what makes Nashville different is a lot of times these Nashville session musicians are studio session musicians that can play for pretty much the top country artists, right? But when you go to other genre, other like rock bands or other, other places, LA or New York, and there's a band, most of the time that band is that band's own band members. They're not session musicians, even though LA and New York has session musicians that have played, like Nathan, East, or Marcus Miller, Victor Wooten, Stanley Clark. All these guys have played on numerous other artists, but they travel, between New York and all that. They get paid to do that, but Nashville got that on lock. And so that's why they have this Nashville charting system. They just know, and they can come together, and it's kind of like the guitar player or the bass player. They know how to make their part work for whoever they're recording for. That's the reason why the Nashville works so well, versus whatever the case. But it's definitely not a race thing. It's just it's more of an influential thing. And anything else. So, because if we kind of, you think about it, when it comes to hip hop, anyone that try to sit there and say Eminem is not a phenomenal rapper, I would call you crazy. You know, Eminem was not a corny rapper like, and people they're gonna hate me in a sense, but I'm sorry, but the Beastie Boys they really were corny. They just had for what they were doing in the 80s, it just worked for them. But the Beastie Boys was not phenomenal rappers. They weren't like Eminem, who's an actual phenomenal rapper. And Eminem could rap with some of the best, you know, we go with, you know, whether it's Method Man, you know, I'm gonna go with you know, any of these, you know, top hip hop artists, you know, Eric B. And I'm not Eric B, he was the DJ. I'm talking about Rakim, right? Rakim and Rakim, not Rakim, Rakim, you know, or rappers like that. You know, but he said, man, said corny was their slick. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It was a niche thing for them, but they weren't phenomenal rappers. Now Eminem's an actual legit phenomenal rapper, and he's not black, he's white, right? So once again, it's really about influential and what influences a person to be good, you know. And anyone that's a solid musician will acknowledge, pretty much, they will acknowledge solid musicians or vocalists, no matter what their race is, you know, kind of like with Tom Jones, you know, Stevie Wonder. You know, Tom Jones is an amazing vocalist for what he does. And, you know, it's the same thing with, you know, Stevie gave him his props, just like what Tom Jones said, you know, gave Stevie Wonder his props. You know, it's just what it is. So let me see. Intricate Incan said, I'm white and you got us beat, fam, huh? Athletically speaking. You know, once again, when it comes to sports, it really depends on the sports. It's just, I would say, who dominates sports for the most part. Football and basketball is probably the most dominant sport for Black folks, right? Because it's highly mixed. You know, when it comes to like baseball, it's more Latinos, you know, getting into, you know, some of the best baseball players that play baseball is Dominican, right? And of course, there are a few black folks in hockey, but that's still a permanent, you know, predominantly white sport, right? It's the same thing with skiing and stuff like that. There are people black. It's a myth that black folks can't swim. Yeah, black folks can swim. But you know, some of the most Olympic winning championships are just white. It's just what it is, you know. It's kind of like with the myth where before the 60s, Arthur Ashe and all that, you know, before they just didn't think black folks could play tennis, which was a lie. And of course, now we know Serena, and you know, it's just that there's just certain sports that black folks just don't get into as much, you know, like tennis. You know, there's Venus. Serena is one of the exceptions, but black folks just don't get into tennis a lot. Our biggest go-to is football and basketball. That's why we even when we play, you know, PlayStation or whatever, NBA Live or whatever, it's going to be a basketball or football sport game. But that's just what we like the most. But now, if you go to other countries where there's black folks involved, we call it we call it football, but they call it, or we call it soccer. They call it football, right? Right. Somebody jumped in Jamaican bobsled, right? There's a lot of, you know, other countries. A lot of them are into soccer. You know, so it really depends on the influence. That is basically what I was trying to say, the whole thing. But oh man, sir, I got started life as a Nashville session guitarist, and we're like an assembly of line factor making music, not complicated but very, very tight. Yeah, that's exactly. It's kind of like what makes Nashville musicians is if you're a guitar player, the best way to describe it is as a guitar player, all you need is the chart system, which is basically a progression chart system, right? Music theory progression chart system, 1 to 4, back to 1, maybe to 5, back to 1, and then up to 4, wherever the progression is going to go, right? But what makes it work is a Nashville guitar player knows how to make his guitar parts sound like what the guitar player is supposed to play on the record. Same thing with the bass player. Same thing if he's playing steel guitar or whatever. Same thing with the drums, and so forth. Same thing with background vocals. This is what parts. They just know what it's supposed to sound like, so they don't have to rehearse with each other and be this band that came in that's, like, let's say it's a AC/DC band or Def Leppard band, whatever. They rehearsed their stuff before they went to the studio to get all their parts down. But they're their own band. So a lot of bands sometimes can't do that. Some people can. I know jazz musicians also do that. But jazz musicians are not rooted in one city that's predominantly known for that. Like, jazz isn't, some people say New Orleans, but jazz bands have played in LA and recorded in LA studios. They played in New York, they played in Detroit, they played in Chicago. Jazz bands have played all over Chicago a lot and so forth. So it really, but that's what make the Nashville. That's all I'm saying about the Nashville stuff. He says Master Edney work. Someone like Keith Urban actually playing, write his own records, or would it be sessions with his own voice added at the end. It's kind of like, well, Keith Urban. A lot of times Keith Urban is going to hire, Nashville. Now, as far as writing, it really depends, because it depends on his record contract, and if he's, if they're bringing in songwriters and so forth to do that. It just depends. So, I'm sure he done some of his own vocal overdubs. But I'm not a 100% expert on Keith Urban, so I'm not going to jump on Keith Urban, and say I know, because I don't listen, I don't really know Keith Urban, and I just know that I know the Nashville system. Ward me said jazz, bebop, rock, R&B, funk, rap, all pioneered by black music. Yeah. So, but there are white musicians that are just as good as the black ones. There really are. Well, who invented the recorders and drum machines and everything? The Japanese. That's actually, let's go back. Let's go back to the recording. And when it comes to recording, and there's a certain guitar maker. So I would say research that before you throw that statement in there. Now let's see. When I was in Buffalo, New York, I watched some school kids play basketball. It was black on black and white on white. I found that interesting. Once again, and you also got to remember, sometimes if you go back, the United States used to be highly segregated. The United States didn't really become a little bit more integrated until around the 70s, 80s. So some areas, if you look at it, there are certain parts of the United States that are, there's quite a few black folks, some Latinos, but the United States is still 68% white. Geographically, that's just a fact. 68% of the country is white. Black folks only make up 14% of the population. That's just numbers, it's just what it is. Let me see. Oh, Brad Paisley. Okay, gotcha. So War says, is Maddie invisible? Did you block him for? No. I don't know. Maddie, he just wrote something. So Maddie's still there as far as I'm, so let's see. Annex and Les Paul invented the, yes, I'm saying, that's why I say you want to look at Les Paul. I'll say you better look at a certain guitar player before you start saying just Japanese. He said Amex, he meant Ampex, yeah. Well, and Les Paul shot his idea for multi-track recording to Ampex. And he eventually won it over, and that's basically the creation of multi-track recording. Because people were just doing live recording, for the most part, before you do multi-track recording. So man says, don't answer if you don't want to, maybe too bad. Do you have experience any negative ratio? Let me tell you, I'll tell you this. Being me, of course, y'all can see I'm brown skin and, consider being black, right? Yes, you're going to be in the United States would be impossible. Now to see, like, have I ever experienced like police brutality? No, I've never been disrespected by a police officer, nothing like that. But this is how I know when it comes to racial tension. And I live in Tennessee, right? As an example, I don't see it as much, but you can always tell because the person that's racist that do not like black people or minorities or whatever, they tend to be, they have this eye piercing stare. It's almost like you can see it in their eyes, right? And their answers are really, really short. It's like they just don't want to interact with you. And you can feel it, you can feel it. But because I'm a type of person, I don't really worry about people like that because I'm that type of person. Being a veteran and having experience with being a shooter weapon that can get you over 500 or 5 football fields away, and my experience with shooting weapons from being in the United States Army, and I have weapons, I don't have a fear because my thought is this: hating someone, the only person that has a problem is the person that hates someone, because people don't control their DNA. A person that's born Asian whether it's an Asian male or an Asian female, didn't control that. Now their mom and dad has a big gigantic influence to that. So if mom and dad is, Chinese, 9 times 10, the daughter or son is going to be Chinese. That's just the way it is. That's DNA. There's DNA. But for me to hate someone because of that Chinese person don't have a problem. I do. So because a lot of times you be amazed. Most people are racist because they've been bred and taught to be racist, because they've been taught at a really young age to believe racial stereotypes like black folks can't swim, or black folks aren't intelligent, or Latinos are dumb or whatever. It's kind of like this. If at my job, there's actual Venezuelan people, electricians, right? They're electricians, and they deal with top. I'm not an electrician, so the only difference between them speaking Spanish and English is the name of the word. The meaning is the same. This is the reason why if you talk to someone in a different language and they understand it, then if you look at it, it's kind of like, how do you say, like when I was in Korea, we would say, annyeonghaseyo. Well, if you say hello and they don't speak English, you say hello to a Korean, they're gonna look at it because they don't understand what that means because they don't speak English. But the minute you go annyeonghaseyo, they go, oh, annyeonghaseyo, because it's common, right? They know what that means. You'll see they're having that ease because now they can understand. That's all language is. So I know that's a long answer to racial tension, but that's all it is. Anyone that's racist, a racist person is the one with the problem, not the person that they're racist against. And I'll leave it on like that. So, let me see. Oh yeah, where the Germans had tape and microphones and modern music gear was cooked up in Japan. Akai roller. Well, you think about it, like I said, when it goes back to what I was saying about different cultures and languages and all that, look how smart almost all these countries are, whether it's, Chinese making electronics or Japanese making electronics or Germans making some of the most prominent cameras were German made, right? Right. So the only difference between German and English is the language. The it's like in every country, there's highly intelligent people in every country, and there are some really stupid people in every country. That's just people are people, right? So that's how I look at it, so moving on, let's see. So let's see, like Maddie never blocked. I'll say who. So handle this topic very well, by the way. Thanks. So super chat. I don't think I have because I'm not monetized. So I never really look at the super chats. I need to get off there because I know you keep telling me to put on my dang super chats, and I don't because I don't think my channel set up to set money, but I do appreciate it. But I'll look into it because I know I keep saying looking into it, and so it says she's got to turn them on. So, but anyhow, well, that's worse of in 2025. I think the hybrid method is the best way to go. Well, most people in some form of fashion is hybrid anyway. They might not think they are. Some people just don't have. In other words, if you have just a computer, an audio interface, and plugins and software, but yet you got one standalone preamp, right? Let's say you have a Tone Beast standalone preamp and a microphone. You're hybrid. You just may not have a ton of gear, but you're hybrid. That's just unless you're using the preamps in your interface. If you use anything, if you got a couple of pieces outboard, you're hybrid. Anyhow, so it's a 99 Shades of Grey. So this has been a fun live chat. I really do appreciate everyone tuning in. It is 10:30, and I'm going to wrap it up because I am exhausted. But I felt that I needed to talk about the premise of this was just to talk about expensive gear versus clones, and and I'm at this point. I don't think it really matters what you use. It just matters how you use it and the results you get from it. That's my take on expensive gear versus clones and software. So I appreciate everyone. Warheart Arts, Man Network, always, Maddie, 2 chats, and everyone else that tuned in. I think a lot of people left. Intricate. Let me scroll up a few more people. I think I saw Zone Recording Studios and Spawn, Bon Shamir. Who else was here? And a few other people. So Seven Sun Music. A lot of people that tune in every week. Some people didn't get a chance to tune in because, like I said, I normally do this a little bit earlier in the day, but it was Easter and had Easter dinner. I said, let me do this before I go to sleep. So I really do appreciate everyone tuning in. I hope everyone have a good night as well. Thanks for tuning in, and I really appreciate everyone. And I guess we'll see you when the next time I get a chance to do this live stream. All right. Y'all have a great one, and peace to everyone.